field trip today takes us down to St Helene in the St Lawrence River, and the entire island is a park called Parc Jean Drapeau. There are a lot of interesting attractions there, and it's easy to reach by metro because the Yellow Line actually station is down here at the south end. So, although it's not connected at the surface now, it's inferred that the volcanic rocks on St Helene were connected at depth to, or probably came from the same magma supply system that built Mount Royal. And although the rocks look a little bit different, there's nothing on Mount Royal that looks quite like what you can see on El St. Helene. So there are actually a lot of places where you can get a little bit of outcrop through the center of the island. They've also used some of this local rock here in construction, for example, of the building that's now the Stuart Museum here. But by far the best place to see it is Stationnement P13, the parking lot here just under the Jacques Cartier Bridge. There's the bridge. And the wall here of the quarry is actually a place where people come to do a little bit of rock climbing sometimes.
So in this video, we'll have a look at some of the main characteristics of the rock that makes up most of St Helene. This is an old quarry, so it looks a little bit different inside the quarry than it does outside in other parts of the island where the natural outcrops have had more natural weathering processes affect them. And we'll look at the basic attributes that you want to include in your rock description and how that leads to a rock name and interpretation of how the rock formed.
Okay, so what are the general rules for doing a rock description? Have a good look, run all over the place, see everything you can about the rock so that you have a sense of what it generally looks like. Decide what its really common or its really dominant characteristics are. Break it down. If you can break it down into class and matrix. A lot of rocks have what we call a bimodal grain size distribution. That is something fine and then bigger things that are clearly in a different size class. In between the class, what's supporting the class and holding the class is a matrix, which is so fine grained that we can't see individual crystals in it. So basically, by dividing the rock into those two parts, which we can describe independently of one another, and then we also describe their relationship to one another, we can achieve a pretty specific rock description. So if you can get your eye on the matrix in between all of the class, it's a little bit speckled, mostly gray, kind of a slightly greenish tinge to it where it's fresh, gray to grayish green. And that's pretty much all we can say about it because it's so fine-grained. So it's very hard. It doesn't scratch with a knife. I would call it an aphanitic welded ash matrix. Some of these faces show a really amazing diversity of rock class in here. So over here, we've got a good sized hunk of limestone. It's got a little bit of a rim around it that shows some thermal alteration, but not much. Some of these smaller pieces actually have a much better developed rim. Maybe they've been in the system longer. Maybe they came from farther down in the sequence. That looks like a piece of hornfels to me. A baked up black shale. We've got some pink granites. That's all the way down from the Grenville basement. We're going to see actually the source of those rocks next week, but those are the basement rocks that the St. Lawrence sediments of Paleozoic age were deposited on top of, and so this diatreme came blasting up through everything down in the basement and brought it all up. Looks like another piece of limestone, but it is a different shade of gray. Some of these pieces, like this one here, the edges get quite fuzzy. They're almost completely absorbed, either melted or altered by that volcanic, ashy, hot, gas-rich diatreme matrix that came exploding up through here and incorporated all of these clasts.
Some of these clasts, like this limestone fragment here, actually have convex and uneven sides on them. And they don't look like broken fragments. They don't have the shape, angular shape and sharp corners that you would expect from a fragmented rock. So this is actually, these embayments on the surface of the clast are evidence that the clast was corroded by dissolving into the melt or being thermally eroded by the melt during the transport.
Some of them actually have this sort of snowball shape where there's like an irregular piece of rock in the middle with an angular shape, and then a smooth green layer on the outside of a snowball. There's another one. There's another one. Those things actually form when clasts are tossing around in this hot ash gas flow. Ooh, here's another one that's super cute. And they actually start to accrete like a snowball. And so they get lots of little ash particles stuck onto them. Woo! Oh, now I'm seeing them everywhere. That's amazing. Once you see something, you can start to recognize them everywhere. And it's interesting that some of these grains were accreting, and yet we have grains like this one. It has serrated edges, embayed edges. All right, that means that it was partially melted or partially absorbed around its edges. So it's the opposite of these beautiful accretionary snowball grains that are right next door. It must have reacted differently. It must have been more soluble in the magma or the gases than these guys. Just garden variety granite. Anything would stick to that. It's pretty stable at any conditions. Let's see. Here we go. There's a quartzite. That's going to be a little piece of the Potsdam quartzite, it looks like. Sort of a yellowy, a slightly warm beigey color. That's what's locally the oldest rock. That's the Cambrian sandstone, basically, that's at the bottom of the St. Lawrence sequence here. All right, you're probably wondering, why was it so explosive? Where did it come from? What did it have in it? How deep did it start? How fast did it accelerate? It's sometimes hard to find clues to that, but I'm going to tell you a little secret. Microdiamonds have been found in some similar diatreme rocks in some of the Monterey hills. That tells us that we're probably looking at depths of 60 or 70 kilometers at least. That this magma started rocketing up through the bottom of the continent, through the mantle on the bottom of the continent, and picking up those microdiamonds from where they're stable, and then accelerating toward the surface and going so fast that they didn't completely break down before they got here. So that's pretty remarkable. And in fact, these rocks are closely related to kimberlites, which are the rocks that form most economic diamond deposits. There's never been a diamond mine here in the Monterey area, but very similar rocks that are Eocene in age, so about 55 million years or a bit younger, up in the Canadian Shield, actually do provide Canada's economic diamond industry. It's important to include in every rock description a description of the very fresh rock when it's freshly broken, not weathered at all inside, and a description of the weathered surface. Most of the time, if you are out in nature looking for rocks, you're going to see only weathered surfaces. That's why geologists also carry a hammer so they can get inside, scrape off moss, knock off desert varnish and lichens, and see what the inside fresh rock looks like. Both the fresh appearance and the weathered appearance can be very characteristic. Once you think you have your head around it, you've got an idea of color, luster, shape, size, distribution, all of those things, then pick a spot that looks like very average, very characteristic. Sit down and have a close look at it. Get out your hand lens, look for details. If you can, divide the rock into different portions that you can categorize separately. This is a very overwhelming rock to try to do one big description on because it's so diverse inside. But if we break it into class and matrix, we can deal with the matrix, right? The matrix is pretty homogeneous. For this rock in particular, because the classes are so diverse, it would take a little while because you'd want to list all of the different rock types that are there, what kind of size distribution they have, whether they have the lapilli-like coatings on them, whether they form the core of those snowballs. Wouldn't it be interesting to know if there is a higher proportion of snowballs that have a deeper metamorphic rock core? That would imply that they started forming way deep down. Maybe by the time the diatreme got near the surface, it wasn't hot enough to accrete ash in the particles, and that's why we don't see it as much on the sedimentary rock class. Sedimentary rock class also often are much bigger, and it's not because they're stronger or more robust. It's probably just because they got picked up last. So there's a lot of clues to the details of the dynamics of the eruptive process that we can start to hypothesize about just by making some first order observations like that.